Hi, my name is Veronica Villafana. My research project is on understandings and stigmas associated with autism throughout various cultures. What is autism? Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a developmental disorder that can be diagnosed by the age of 2 years old. Although here in the United States, ASD and autism are used interchangeably, around the world, autism is the most recognized term for this disorder. Around the world, autism is found in about 7 out of every 1,000 births, or in about 67 million people. This is approximate because, like I'll mention later on, not everyone with autism gets diagnosed by a medical professional. Autism was once considered a rare disease, but now it has become one of the most common developmental disorders. Autism is a spectrum, so every individual is very different. In general, the characteristics associated with autism can include deficits in social interaction, communicating, behavioral issues, and restricted interests. What is stigma? Stigmas can be defined simply as negative attitudes. These negative attitudes are usually targeted at a particular characteristic that doesn't coincide with culturally established norms. Stigmas are important to study because they can really affect so many different aspects of one's life, and they affect often the family members of those that are stigmatized, not just the individual. My research question is, how did the stigmas and understandings of autism vary across different cultures? Stigmas and misconceptions associated with autism can be influenced by various factors, and they vary across different cultures. Of course, there are over 6,000 cultures around the world, so to narrow it down, I specifically looked at the countries that conducted research on autism. I chose to do this because some cultures have different names and explanations for the symptoms associated with autism, and this alone could be another explanation for the stigmas found or not found in these cultures. Autism stigmas and misconceptions are, of course, found everywhere all over the world. I found early in my research that a majority of the research that has been conducted have been in primarily Western countries, so I chose to focus on the few cultures that are not Western, but have still conducted some research on autism. This way I knew that there were people within that culture that recognized autism similarly to how the Western countries do, so when I compared them to the United States, they would still have that same basic understanding of autism. The cultures that I chose to focus on in my research were the United States, Japan, China, Korea, and Indonesia. Japan has strong autism research. In China, approximately 13.7 million people are living with autism. Korea has a higher reported prevalence of autism than any other country, at 2.64% of their population having autism. And Indonesia, like many other countries around the world, have been experiencing an increase in the rate of autism diagnosis. So I mentioned several times the stigmas associated with autism, but what are these stigmas? A few of the stigmas associated with autism include giving birth to a child with autism is a punishment, the belief that autism is not something that you're born with, but instead is developed due to a poor relationship with the mother, and that having an autistic child with someone outside your own culture can make you significantly more likely to have an autistic child yourself. In Indonesia, for example, it is believed by many that a child having autism is just a form of karma, that if you give birth to a child that has autism, that means you have engaged in a taboo behavior and that this is your punishment. What can contribute to these stigmas? Of course, this is going to be a little bit different in each culture, but what I found was that something really interesting, that there's two categories that a lot of cultures are separated into: interdependent and independent, or individualistic culture. The United States, for example, we have an independent or individualistic culture, which really emphasizes being unique and differentiating yourself from everyone else. The many non-Western cultures, like the ones that I'm researching here, they would be categorized in the interdependent culture, which just means that they focus heavily on interpersonal harmony and paying more attention to others than yourself. In these kinds of cultures, uniqueness is actually perceived negatively, unlike in the US, for example. Research suggests that the tendency to conform to these social norms, for example in Japan, have led to stigmas forming for most mental health issues, not just autism. In other words, due to the heightened emphasis on collective norms that help everyone to look the same in this culture, it is really easy to spot those who stand out. In Japan, stigma isn't always just due to the disorder itself, but just due to the fact that the disorder is giving this individual characteristics that's causing them to look different than the rest of the group. In Korea, there's another developmental disorder that they recognize as reactive attachment disorder, or RAD. Many of these children that would get diagnosed with autism instead get diagnosed with RAD, which is believed to be caused by poor attachments with their mother or just a complete absence of the mother. Another thing that contributes to these stigmas are just education. Sometimes stigmas form from misconceptions that come from lack of experience or just the lack of knowledge in general. In China, there are less than 30 hospitals that can diagnose autism, but as I mentioned earlier, there's over 13 million people there that are autistic. The media is another big thing that contributes. The media has a very large impact on how people think and even what they believe. For example, in China, there have been studies that found the media delivers a lot of actually inaccurate data and biased information that leads to stigmas associated with autism, and families with an autistic family member have felt shamed and stigmatized by many of these forms of media. Misconceptions of autism. The misconceptions that are common among educated adults in the US include that autistic children cannot form attachments and that they are deliberately uncooperative. Among the educated adults in Japan, common misconceptions of autism include that it can be outgrown with treatment and that autistic people have low levels of empathy and intelligence. And just educated adults just refers to those with college educations. So why does this matter? Studying the stigmas and understandings of autism in different cultures is so important because the way that a culture understands and stigmatizes a disease, not just autism, directly affects how frequent and accurately people there are reporting their disease, getting diagnosed, and receiving treatment. There have been multiple studies suggesting the stigmas associated with autism comes from cultural influences rather than the lack of knowledge of the developmental disorder itself. By increasing awareness, this can increase the psychological services that can provide early intervention in areas that are lacking. By increasing the knowledge and reducing the stigmas attached to autism, this can help promote education settings for children with autism, appropriate education settings. In Korea, for example, only 42% of the children who should be in special education classes are. So there is a large 58% that are struggling to keep up and learn in traditional classrooms. This is holding them back and not allowing these children to reach their full potential. And this is a problem that is found all over the world, not just in Korea. It is really important to recognize that although these different cultures I discussed all have research on autism, there is still an overwhelmingly large majority of autism research that is on Western countries and on Western cultures. So there is a need to expand this globally and to increase the research that's being done in other countries as well. This could really help understand sociocultural factors that influence autism in people of different cultures. In conclusion, children diagnosed with autism or ASD could benefit from more research being done on different stigmas and understandings of autism around the world. Each intervention program can be life-changing for these children, and the spread of knowledge and resources can help promote this.